At last, after encountering almost insurmountable difficulties, Mr. J.B. Mulholland's new theatre is in the last stages of completion and is announced to open on Boxing Day. Wimbledon has hitherto been obliged to go to London for its entertainment. The opening of this theatre will help supply the pick of the productions of the West End theatres and bring them to its door. Boxing Day 1910, Wimbledon has been home to one of the most impressive provincial theatres in the country. Some of the greatest names in theatre, music, film and television have made the 15-mile trip from London to the leafy suburb. Laurel and Hardy, Gracie Fields, Morecambe and Wise are just some of the names that have topped the bill. Hollywood legend Marlene Dietrich made her final British appearances on its stage, and its history rivals that of any theatre on Shaftesbury Avenue. Now, in its 90th year, the grand old lady is still doing big business, with the original Georgian decorations continuing to welcome her audience.
So many theatres that you can go in around the country are beautiful buildings, all the facilities are there, but there's something missing, and I think it's the heart, and I think it's the people who run it, the family of theatre. And the thing that has always been present at Wimbledon has been this amazing passion. The people who work here do actually love the theatre. They love not only this theatre, but theatre in general. And there isn't a divide between the front of house and the backstage. So you come in as an artist and you're immediately part of that family. I don't mean to say that there's sort of red carpet, airs and graces, all that stuff. We're all working together to entertain an audience, and from the minute that audience walks in the door, the front door, to the minute they leave, they feel they're at an event, at somewhere special, coming into somewhere welcoming and warm and friendly. And that instantly, not only does it help performers, but it helps the audience to have a wonderful time.
Well, it started with the vision of one man, J.B. Mulholland, who was a theatre owner. He had one theatre in Camberwell and one theatre in Hammersmith. And he saw Wimbledon, the potential Wimbledon. It wasn't a suburb, because the word didn't exist then, but it was to become a suburb. And there was a space here. It was an old manor house. He bought the manor house. It was a triangular site. And he built a theatre because he believed that every community should have a theatre. And it was completed in 1910. And he was very much a hands-on man. He had a lot to do with the design, although of course he had two architects. And it's a lot of people think it's a Matchams theatre, but it's not. But it's about as close to a Matchams that you can get. And he had this vision of providing entertainment for all parts of the community. And his philosophy is very close to our philosophy, then, is to provide the best that you can get in all the entertainment facets: opera, ballet, plays, children's shows, and of course pantomime. And it opened in 1910 on Boxing Day with a pantomime of the day, which was called Jack and Jill, and it's had a pantomime here ever since. There was no cinema. So a dear old lady told me once, I said, what is it like? Because she was actually here on the opening night. I said, what is it like? What happened? If I was standing on the steps now, what would it be like? She said, well, you know the football crowds there, when they go towards the football ground, she said, there's lots of people. They would all come down the Broadway like that. Can you imagine? You know, the equivalent of the football crowd walking down Broadway just to one place, this theatre.
With the help of a regular stream of hit shows from the West End, J.B. Mulholland established one of the most successful venues in the country. The grand old lady continued to flourish after his death midway through 1925, under the stewardship of the Mulholland family and the estate's trustees.
My association with Wimbledon Theatre goes back quite a long way, because in the 40s, about 45 or 46, I was in this lovely theatre with Wilfred Pickles in a play called The Cure for Love. We did an enormous tour. It was when Wilfred was at the height of his Have a Go fame, and we toured the country for about 10 months, and it was, you know, a very successful show. And then in the 50s, I was here with a musical called Love from Judy, which was a musical version of Daddy Longlegs. And in the 60s, I moved to Wimbledon. And in '94, I was here in pantomime with Rolf Harris. And it's a most delightful theatre to play in, and also it's a wonderful theatre to be in. And it's been beautifully refurbished, and it's a joy, really. In this particular theatre, there is a wonderful atmosphere. It's big, it's a big theatre, but it's still, on the stage, it still feels intimate. The Palladium has that too. It's enormous, but it doesn't really feel it when you're on the stage.
I was here, living here in 1938, 39, 40. In fact, my first pantomime was here at the start of the war, 1939, when it was Cinderella. And what I chiefly remember is the walk down at the end when the two ugly sisters, one of them had a yellow Spitfire perched on her wig, and the other one had a great sort of bulging barrage balloon on top of hers. And I then started going to St Mary's School, and when the raids began, which was September 1940, the place that the school went as an air raid shelter was under the stage of Wimbledon Theatre. And so when the sirens sounded, we all filed out of our classrooms and along the 50 yards or something like that to a door at the side of the theatre, went down the steps into this dark, shadowy, very mysterious place, where one of our teachers told us ghost stories to take our minds off what was happening, you know, the crash bangs going on up above. And I had this memory, this sense of a tight circle of children listening to the teacher, and the shadows increasing further and further as one goes into the corners of this place where I haven't been since 1940, under the stage, filled with the dust of decades, I expect. And we went around and exploring, seeing trying to work out how the traps worked, and finding pies that when you pressed a button, snakes would jump out, you know, pantomime stuff. With living so close, I was obviously walked, well, everyone walked to school in those days. But one morning after a night raid, just as I was passing the theatre on my way to the school, I saw this mass of tangled metalwork and greenish glass on the pavement just by the front steps. And the angel that used to be on top of the globe, on top of the theatre, had gone. In the night, obviously, the blast had sent it rocketing down and crashed to pieces on the pavement. And though there's some doubt about whether this is actually true, whether that's to say whether it was the angel or whether it was just the globe itself or some other piece of glass, because the angel itself disappeared and no one quite knows what happened to it. And I think the chances are strong that what I saw was the angel down there, and it's always stayed with me as a kind of symbol that the old times, the old familiar world was changing, was just crashing down in ruins.
In 1955, experienced actor-manager Peter Haddon took charge, bringing over 30 years of experience to the theatre, along with a full company of actors.
I was very lucky. I started work for Peter Haddon on the 1st of April 1957, April Fool's Day. But it wasn't a foolish thing I did, I can tell you. No, I was... the scenic designer here at the time was a fellow called Anthony Purvis, brilliant designer, did some wonderful stuff. And we had been together in Perth before, well, in the early 50s. And he recommended me to Peter when I came to London. And Peter said, "I'll come and see me, old boy," which I did. And he said, "Be delighted to have you." So I started work. He was very good to me, Peter. He was a wonderful man, because he had a sort of nucleus. It was a weekly rep, and weekly rep was very hard work, as you may know, may not know, I don't know, but, you know, you did a different play each week, which meant on a Tuesday afternoon, you'd read through the play and set the first act. Usually there were 3 acts in plays in those days. You do the first act on Tuesday. Wednesday afternoon, you do the second act. Thursday morning, you do the third act because you had a matinee in the afternoon. And Friday, you would polish up. Saturday, you would have a run-through. Monday, you would come in early in the afternoon, or in the morning usually, have a dress rehearsal in the afternoon, open Monday evening, 7:30. Next day, Tuesday, it would start all over again. So you were always on the go. But Peter was great. He had a nucleus of about, I suppose, 8, 9 people that he relied on. He looked on them as a family, really. He was charming. He was delightful. He knew his stuff. I mean, he made his name in the 30s, I think, as a Derek Nimmo type, really, a silly arse, English silly arse type, you know. But Peter was all there. He was a good businessman. He was enchanting. He told lovely stories. People used to imitate him like mad because he had a very distinctive voice, and he used to call you old boy or old man. In fact, he'd stand up in the circle there while you were rehearsing down here on the stage. Often you wouldn't know he was there, and suddenly you'd hear this voice saying, "Ah, I like that, old boy." And that would go. And he was tremendous. He would come round before the show on a Monday night when you were like this, shaking with nerves first night, not knowing whether you were going to get through it all right. And he'd say, "Good luck, old boy, good luck." And he'd come round after and say, It sounded as though you've been doing it all your life, you know. No, he was terrific.
He was a very likeable man. He's a lovable man, actually. I mean, he was a bit of an eccentric, quite eccentric sometimes. I mean, but he was a lot of fun. When he was in Wimbledon, when things got a bit stressful, he just used to go out and walk round the little park in King's Road, Wimbledon, or get his car out and go up to Cannizzaro Park and walk round and round and come back all sort of calmed down. He was, the actors loved him.
All sorts of memories flood back, mostly surrounding Peter because he was such a personality. He was so large, wonderful, powerful man, personality-wise. And you think, by God, yes, I spent my juvenile days here, but you played everything, I mean, from 18-year-olds to 60-year-olds or whatever, because that was what you did in rep. But no, it really brings it all back, and I feel, I don't know, makes you very emotional, actually. We had such fun. We really did. But it was one of the best parts of my life.
Peter was, you know, he's a gentleman of the old school. I think that I learnt how to run a theatre. One thing I learnt was that you never let your audience come in without somebody being there to say good evening, and you didn't let them go out without somebody being there to say good evening. So that was the type of, he was very much a personal, he was a figurehead. I mean, he could be quite mad sometimes, but he was a figurehead. And if anybody came to the theatre, he was usually around. You know, he wasn't a sort of distant figure that they only knew the name of. I mean, it was Peter Haddon's company, it was Peter Haddon's theatre, and Peter Haddon was always there.
One of the most important moments for Peter and Audrey came as an unexpected surprise. At the time, it was impossible for them to know they were witnessing musical history when they stumbled into rehearsals for the first ever production of Oliver. Wimbledon was about to give birth to one of the most successful musicals of all time.
Peter and I had been over to Streatham Hill to see something there in the afternoon. And we got back to the theatre early evening, and they were just about to start a run-through of Act 1 without costume. And I think there's one, you know, you have those thrilling theatrical moments when it really gets you in the stomach, you know. And I sat there and listened to all those children singing "Food, Glorious Food." I mean, it was something I will never forget. We didn't even have the benefit of costumes and things then. And that was, one of those great theatrical moments, and of course it was a big plus for the theatre to have that.
Not long after that magical moment, the theatre would be forced into a change of management, with the sad and untimely death of its most ardent supporter.
Peter came back from that week, and he'd got a nasty cold and a cough. and it wouldn't go away, and it turned out he had got lung cancer, and he had to go into the Marsden in the end, and where he died on the 2nd of September. We muddled through for a few months because we had a front of house manager, we had a box office manager, we had in other words, we used to ran by committee for a few months. But he'd got certain plays blocked out, and the pantomime was blocked. And so we got through that, but then of course obviously some move had to be made, and I was approached to say would I take it on. So I said, well, yes, provided I could be in partnership with Arthur, I would take it on, and I would look after all the front of house side, and he would look after all the production side, which I really didn't know anything about. So that's how we took over after the pantomime in the beginning of 1963, and we had a bit of luck at that time because we had Streatham Hill Theatre had closed, and all the big shows had nowhere to go south London. They went to Golders Green, North London, and so we fell into that slot. We had D'Oyly Carte, the Royal Ballet, pre-West End shows, post-West End shows, and our audiences doubled, tripled, quadrupled. We had a most fantastic first year.
The combined efforts of Haddon, Lupton and Lane made sure the theatre continued to be a favourite local landmark. In the mid-60s, the management and public fought to keep the theatre alive when it was revealed schemes were afoot to sell the building.
Like many theatres in the 60s, it was threatened with demolition. I mean, this site is a very valuable site for the council, and the idea was to pull it down and put up a car park, pull it down and put up a block of offices, and with a concession we would have had a little theatre in the basement, which would have been quite impractical and would have been closed down in a very short time. And in fact, it was the people of Wimbledon who stood up and said, we want to keep our theatre. And it then went to a public inquiry, and the inspector said, yes, Wimbledon should keep their theatre. And then the council took it over, and that was in '68 when they decided to refurbish it.
By 1968, the theatre was safe and reopened with a gala performance. From there, in the hands of the Merton Civic Theatre Trust, the venue enjoyed a heyday of big-time stars and entertainment.
Well, I remember it as a kid, because my dad was a panto man, summer season man. He used to be friends with Arthur Lane, who was a manager here all those years ago. And so I remember Arthur Lane coming around the house, and I remember these vague recollections of coming here as a kid, probably swapping the old panto costume or the old panto horse or cow. But my strongest memory of here was when I was first started in the acting profession. I joined the National Theatre, Lawrence Olivier's company, and we did a big musical called Tiger, which is like the equivalent of, Guys and Dolls. It's a big show. And we rehearsed here for 2 weeks. Didn't play here, we just rehearsed here. And John Dexter was the director there. Had this big set, cause about William Blake and Building of Jerusalem. And he said to me, tomorrow you're going to come in, you take all your clothes off and you climb to the top of there and you stand up nude at the top. He was a bit intimidating for a young, pretty actor. So basically I didn't turn up the next day because I was less than keen to come in, and I got the boot, got sacked because he was quite definite about what he wanted. And there's a wonderful stage manager called Diana Boddington, who I shall never forget. And all this happened when I wasn't there. She said, well, you can't sack that boy. He's too sweet. You can't make him do whatever you want him to do. And I got reinstated, and I came in 2 days later, got told off, and kept me clothes on.
I think theatres, even this beautiful theatre here in Wimbledon, they're only buildings, They're beautiful buildings, but they're only a building until the public arrive for the show. And then it becomes a theatre. Then it becomes a living thing. There are various theatres, you feel so right when you play them. It's like putting a beautiful suit on. You know that it's right. But this Wimbledon Theatre has a very special place in my heart, because I played quite a lot of concerts here, but I also played pantomime here. We did a wonderful pantomime, Sinbad the Sailor, which we never stopped laughing from the time we began to the time we finished. We started off with rather a sketchy pantomime, you could say. On the Thursday or the Friday before we opened, we had one scene painted, and the rest were on in charcoal.
The 60s and 70s saw a boom in television variety, helping general manager Ronnie Scott Dodd to witness some of the greatest names in showbiz come to SW19.
A great number of people who came to play here, for example, Morecambe and Wise came twice, and I was heavily criticised for giving them so much money, but in fact we played to absolute capacity for 4 houses. I remember saying to them, why are you doing such a heavy programme? And they said, well, we've only got 5 years at the top. In those days, that was the contemplation, that you actually had a very limited and clear-cut length of time for the public to love you. Well, they happily loved them for a lot longer than that. And then, of course, Marlena Dietrich, twice. On the first occasion she came, I didn't make her very happy, I'm afraid, because I was watching the end of the show through a little opening that I had in my office wall, which I was enabled to look at the theatre, and I saw all the flowers being thrown and the shrieks of delight and general approbation that she was receiving, and wonderful scenes were going on down there. And just as I'd settled down to do the programme money, came a very firm and very determined on the door. When I opened it, there was a gigantic woman there, about as broad as she was tall. She said, Miss Dietrich wants to see you. So I followed her down through my own theatre, all the way through the corridors, and as I reached Miss Dietrich's dressing room, which had been specially prepared for her, she was standing in the centre, absolutely shaking with rage. And I said, well, what's the matter, Miss Dietrich? She said, you have ruined my performance. You have absolutely ruined my performance. I said, that's impossible. You saw the reception you received. There was no possibility of but she said, it was ruined. Joe had done my lighting beautifully. My key lights were in position, and everywhere there was light, light, light. I said, well, please, let's not discuss it. Let's go and set up the stage and see what can be done about it. So we went onto the stage and set up the stage, and every lighting was perfect, but in the distance you could see along the back of the circle, shining through the windows at the back there, the exit lights. No one would have seen that, and certainly it would have made no difference to her performance, but clearly on the periphery of her vision she could see it. So I said, leave it with me, Miss Dietrich. So sure enough, the following day I got the stage manager, Tom, to put big black legs, which are black curtains, all the way along the back there, which covered it in completely. And it came to the same point in the evening. Suddenly, as I was sitting down, there at the door stood the rather large lady. I followed her once down, in some trepidation this time, and when I got to the dressing room, Miss Dietrich was standing there with a smile and a glass of champagne, which she handed me as I entered the room. She said, thank you, that was perfect. People say that I am difficult. I am not difficult, but don't surprise me, darling.
I was in an episode of The New Avengers, part of which was filmed here. I've never really thought much about it, but you suddenly think, you know, why did they ask to come and film at Wimbledon Theatre? It may have been that there was a bit of spare time going, and whatever, but I don't think it was that. I think it's more that the atmosphere of this place is a very special theatre. If you stand on the stage and you look up to the dress circle, there's this sort of bar thing going around there. It wouldn't be, I don't know what it is, but sort of sliding panels of stained glass. And obviously what happened in the old days was that people, if it was a music hall type production and you didn't have to sort of see everything, they would go to the bar and then they would slide these panels back so that people could look through still with their drink and then sort of wander off. You know, I've seen some great names here, and I always find that the names that are either going to be great or are already great, the ones that take your attention, the second half are normally down in the wings, and it's because you can't really believe what you're seeing. I mean, people like Les Dawson. I remember Les Dawson standing there once before a matinee. We were downstage, centre stage, and he's looking out at the theatre and he said, I love this theatre, Robin. He said, it wraps itself around you. I mean, what a wonderful phrase. It sums it up entirely.
In 1980, another man took the helm of the Grand Old Lady. Mike Lyas originally planned to stay for 6 months and ended up staying for 16 years. Journalist Roger Bing worked closely with Mike for much of that time.
Well, Mike started at Wimbledon in 1980 as the manager. I, of course, am far too young to remember back that far. I came across him first, I think, as about 91. He lived the theatre, literally. He lived above it. He was always there. He may seem to the casual viewer to have been only in the bar or in the vicinity, but he actually lived and breathed the theatre. And I remember when he took me round on one of the early days I was there and was being introduced to the building, if you like, of which he was very, very proud. And he would almost exude the atmosphere of that place, even though he hadn't obviously been there the 90 years of his history. But he would tell you about the artists who had appeared there before. He stood me on the stage and said, just move over here a bit more there. Now stand there, exactly there. That is where Laurel and Hardy actually performed. And my mouth hung open. What? I didn't even know they'd appeared at Wimbledon. But he not only knew that, he knew, or claimed to know, the exact spot. But that was the enthusiasm the man had for the whole place. A most engaging character, I found, very laid back. Loved nothing better than to sit back with his feet on the desk, having a cigarette, and just chatting about anything. Favourite things like football and racing, as well, obviously, as the theatre. He knew a lot about the theatre, but you had to almost prize it out of Mike. He was a very modest guy in many ways, and he wouldn't flummox you with details about the theatre until you started asking questions, and then it would all come out. But in a way, that encapsulates his character, because he was always prepared to take a gamble if he thought that the product was good. My favourite story about Mike, I think, is when he was taking a walk around Cannizzaro Park, just off Wimbledon Common. And typical Mike, although he was away from the theatre, he's still thinking theatrically. And he looked at this particular walled kitchen garden at the foot of the park. And he thought to himself, this would make a cracking spot for an open-air theatre. Now, had he asked me, which wisely he didn't, I'd have said, you're mad, with British weather and all the other problems with open-air theatre. But he went ahead with it. Far from being mad, it was a brilliant idea. I think he lost money over the first few seasons, but gradually, with that sort of thing, you've got to build up your audience, which he gradually, eventually did. And it became the success it is today. And a lot of that is down to quiet, modest Mike having a stroll in the park.
I was doing Peter Pan, and it was a fantastic season. And I had not done Peter Pan. I had not played Peter Pan in pantomime. I had originally played Peter Pan in the West End. And in fact, Wimbledon was our first out-of-town date after we'd been at the Aldwych Theatre. And so I'd done the musical version, very straight version, none of the sort of he's behind you business. So I was very worried about doing Peter Pan the pantomime, but knowing that it was at Wimbledon made me feel comfortable about doing it. It literally did. But I knew that I wanted to come back and do the same kind of flying that I had done before, which was pretty spectacular. And one of the people from out front, Keith, his little boy was watching, and he used to come and watch the show all the time and watch lots of the rehearsals too. And I'm quite possessive and protective about keeping the magic alive, and although sort of saying you mustn't do this at home, you know, I don't want to show the sort of the mechanism of how it works. But he did see the dress rehearsal apparently, and he was overheard saying on one of the later performances, he watched it, you know, every other day he'd come and watch the show, and apparently he said to one of his friends when he was sitting out front that when they were doing the dress rehearsal they used ropes, but now they don't use anything. And it just makes you think, yes, that's what we're doing it for. That's what it's about. Because he totally had suspended belief and allowed himself to believe that was happening.
But Wimbledon Theatre isn't just about the big stage. The studio theatre is also a vital part of the building. Jonathan Kennedy is the man in charge.
That is the studio theatre. Originally, of course, when the whole building was built and opened in 1910, it was a ballroom. And beneath what is now the black hardboard is a beautiful maple-sprung dance floor. What used to be what is now the bar was also originally the stage where the band played, upon which Fred Astaire and his sister Adele danced when they were rehearsing for a show in the West End. So not only is it a great venue now as a studio theatre, it was also originally one of the very first and one of the remaining now intact ballrooms with a real claim to fame there. You know, Hollywood star danced here. The Attic Theatre Club, as it was originally known about 12 years ago, was founded by a company of local actors, Jenny Lee amongst them, Richard Kane, Leo Dolan, and they basically got together as a group of actors living locally saying, we want to create our own theatre. And they started off literally in the attic of Wimbledon Theatre, about 4 flights up under the green dome in what was then the rehearsal space, with a couple of benches, a couple of lanterns, and a lot of willpower and a lot of talent. And from there they created Wimbledon's first and still only studio theatre company. And the company still exists now and still produces work which tours around and still perform in the studio theatre as it's now known. That was about 12 years ago when the Attic was founded, and the studio theatre as it's now known and was renamed was about 7 years ago. The variety of work that we do in the studio theatre is just as broad as in the main house, but in terms of the atmosphere, it's completely different. You can whisper in the studio theatre and still be heard. In the main house, it's a lot more difficult to have that kind of projection. In here, you can really, an actor can kind of work very closely, almost like television. And it's also about developing new talent, new writing, and then watching that and letting it flourish into the future.
Do you want another cup of tea?
No.
Lisa?
Oh, go on then. Look, how long do you think John will be?
I don't know. We've had cake, so it's all gone.
You don't mind waiting, do you, Frank?
Can't be Frank.
That's your name, innit?
Yeah. It sounds nice. You know, when you say it.
Anthony Radford took the helm of the theatre after Mike left and watched over the multi-million-pound renovation. Wimbledon was without its main house for most of 1999, as work was done to upgrade the backstage facilities. However, they reopened with a flourish for the 89th pantomime Cinderella. Radford successfully steered the grand old lady to the new millennium, but the future is now in the hands of a new man.
How I feel? Very passionate and positive. Passionate because it has that feeling to it naturally, and also the people that work here all feel the same. The audience is very, very loyal and very responsive to whatever you're doing. But positive because of the situation we're in. That we have now, following refurbishments, following some reorganisation as far as staffing and management and systems go, we've got huge potential. We're the 7th largest theatre in London, and we can now present large-scale productions as well as medium-scale productions. We've got 1,600 seats, so therefore we can take large sums of money, accommodate an awful lot of people, accommodate large shows. So the potential, so I'm very positive about the whole thing. As far as audiences go, I think we've got to develop our audience to a degree whereby in developing the programming we develop our audience, but it's a catch-22. To develop the programme, we have to have an audience to develop. So it's working with our existing audience, trying to find new audiences to come in and find and to experience the building and the existing product we're putting on at the moment, and get them to get a feel for the place and association with the place, and communication. You know, we've got to communicate with them in a very upfront way, be very straightforward with them, but when they come in here we've got to give them good customer service. They've got to be able to book a ticket straight away when they want to book a ticket. They've got to get a drink at the bar when they want to get a drink at the bar. It's got to be very comparable to whatever other organisations are doing, or you know, any other leisure facilities. It's got to be, the service has got to be the same. The auditorium is virtually exactly as it was 1910 when it was built and opened. It's only really that the backstage area that's changed in the last 5 years. The rest of it is still very, very traditional, and it has that very traditional feel. Performers who come in here say, yeah, they love the theatre because, okay, 1,600 seats, which is a large space, but actually when you perform on the stage, it's as if it
cuddles you to a degree. From an audience point of view, because you're very close to the stage, because of the way it's been designed, that they get a very close interaction with the performers. So it has a very traditional feel with it. The traditional side of it is all still there.
And as for tomorrow, the doors are open and the show must go on?
The show always goes on, yeah. Whatever, the show always goes on. And it's horrible, it's an awful cliche really, but it does.